Hola, comrades. Today's topic of interest, Xenoblade Chronicles. To say I love this game would be an understatement. It is my second favorite video game ever made, and yet I have not given it a full episode. To be sure, I talked about it a lot during my Xenoblade Chronicles 2 review, and then again during what I said about 2 in my video on the top 10 games of 2017, but that's not really comparable now, is it? Also, let me say that while my opinion on 2 has fluctuated, my opinion on 1 has not. When I talked about Xenoblade Chronicles 2 initially in my video on how to build a fantasy world, I was ecstatic. I thought this game was every bit as good as the first. Then when the time came for my year's end list, I dropped it to number 4 on my list of the year's best games, and spent about a minute or two of the 2 to 3 minute section railing on it. Maybe I was too angry. Probably. I wouldn't change that number 4 position, no, but if I remade that list today, I probably would not spend as much time attacking the game. My opinion on the first game has not changed. It is still amazing, so let's talk about that, shall we? The largest reason why I never made a video on this game before is actually a very boring reason, and it is the same reason I usually wait to make videos, or don't make them at all. I don't have an angle. Video essays are just that, essays. And essays need driving questions, and they need thesis statements answering those questions. What I usually ask myself when I want to think up a video about work is, what makes this thing great? Easy question, yeah? Well, not necessarily. It's straightforward, but straightforward is not the same as easy. A game is not good for only one reason. I mean, most movies that are truly great have strong character work, but that in of itself is too vague a reason to analyze. Within that one reason is maybe 10 or 15 analyzable reasons. Things that can actually be debated and thought about and analyzed and criticized. What even constitutes great character work? In the same vein, what constitutes great gameplay or great visuals? Because of this, I try to enter each analysis with a workable thesis. It needs to be broad enough that it works as an explanation for why the game is good, but it needs to be narrow enough that the explanation is not simplified to the point of meaninglessness. For this episode, that thesis is Xenoblade Chronicles works as well as it does because it makes every area feel like its own separate world by crafting distinct, colorful, coherent ambiances. It does this in 3 ways that I will go over in this analysis. Number 1, the visuals. Xenoblade Chronicles visuals have received a lot of undue flack. As it was released on the relatively low-powered Wii, it was simply unable to replicate the polygon counts of the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. And it certainly doesn't have the power of the systems that are in play today. It has been said that this looks more dated than some of the RPGs released 5, even 10 years prior. But even if those people are right, so what? We in gaming need to stop associating realistic graphics with the idea of a game looking good. The first depends on the parameters of the system. The second is a choice made by the development team. As far as I'm concerned, Ocarina of Time looks amazing even though it was released about 20 years ago. Donkey Kong Country was released in 1994, but it still outshines the latest Call of Duty snooze fest visually. Xenoblade Chronicles visuals may not have had as many polygons as its competitors, but the game is beautiful nonetheless. Without thinking too hard, I can pick out a number of vistas that have stuck with me, such as the wide, sprawling plains of Bionis' Leg, the bioluminescence of Satoral Marsh at night, the floating islands of Aerith Sea, or the golden crystals of Valak Mountain at night glittering against an austere black sky. But not only are these areas made beautiful by their visuals, they are distinguished from one another. If I were dropped down in a random square of land in Xenoblade Chronicles, I could discern almost instantaneously which of the game's major areas I was in. There are times it is the major landmarks that matter, such as the cascading rush of Magna Falls and Magna Forest. Other times it is something much, much smaller, such as the Nappan craftsmanship in Frontier Village. In too many games, even games I like, there can be towns and cities that blend together, but here they made sure to craft a distinct visual aesthetic for each and every area. Number 2, the exploration. Xenoblade Chronicles was ahead of its time in tying the broad exploration that had been present since the early days of gaming to the more emotional, heartfelt storytelling that became more prevalent as the art form advanced. This is very much a game about using exploration as a means to emotionally affect the player. It's not about uncovering all the game's mysteries, as was the case in titles like the original Legend of Zelda. Rather, it's about that exhilarating sense of discovery. But that discovery is different depending on not only what's being discovered, but how it is discovered. Accordingly, Xenoblade changes the texture of exploration depending on the area. The most obvious instance of this is the divide between the wilderness areas like Aerith Sea and the populated areas like Alchemoth. In the wilderness areas, you have to cross great distances to find treasure, and that travel itself is rewarded by the game in the form of gains in experience points. This is in contrast to populated areas, where the goal is to talk to people to gain information and quests. And completing enough of these quests not only raises the player's affinity with individual NPCs, but also with the entire area. However, even within this split, there are differences. For example, Central Factory is more linear, whereas Bionis' Leg is more open-ended. Also, in Valak Mountain, there is much climbing, whereas in Aerith Sea, there is, to the chagrin of many, more of an emphasis on swimming. And between the populated areas, there is a difference in exploration because of the difference in the races of the inhabitants. The creatures of Alchemoth are High Entia, who have a much different culture than the Nappan who occupy Frontier Village. Number 3, the music. Arguably Xenoblade's strongest suit is its music. I'd rank its OST as the best of any game ever. The combination of Yoko Shimomura, Ace Plus, and Manami Kiyota produces a lush, symphonic palette that is simply unmatched. There's a dreamy, ethereal glow to the soundtrack that places it well within the realm of the fantastical, but it is kept from seeming too distant and abstract by the lower register, especially the strings and percussion. The area themes deserve special mention, as they carve out surprisingly varied and idiosyncratic sonic identities for each area. The most famous piece in the franchise, Gaur Plains, which plays as you race across Bionis' Leg, is both adventurous and portentous, fitting of the first truly giant main area in the game. This is the first chance you have to explore what makes this game special in terms of design, and those enormous beginning swells encourage exploration, leading the player out from Tefer Cave and into the true heart of the game. However, this is only the beginning, and from here the game only gets more fascinating, and the areas only get more creative, hence the portentous nature of the track. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Aerith Sea, my personal favorite track in the game. It's surreal and entrancing, appropriate considering how the islands float because of the surplus of ether. It's serene, but there's also a latent sense of unperturbable majesty to it, which is appropriate considering how close it is to Alchemoth, the most regal city in Bionis and the home of the High Entia. And that is barely the tip of the iceberg. Just listen to the themes for Colony 9, Agniratha, and Central Factory. So much can be discerned about those areas without even having to visit them. This is not to mention how the music changes from day to night, articulating the desire to create different ambiances for different time periods that is so absolutely evident in the visual design. The task Xenoblade faced was challenging. It's easy to create ambiance for a fire level or a desert level, but when the areas are much more involved than that, creating a distinct atmosphere is daunting. The atmosphere must not only convey factual information about a level, but leave a thorough emotional impression on the player. I could talk for days about why Xenoblade Chronicles is one of the best games ever created, but this is its achievement that is most underappreciated and unparalleled. It leads to a world where exploration is not only rewarding, but thrilling, awe-inspiring even. Game design is not merely about where to place the treasure chests and the secret passageways. There's game design on a micro level, which is about the individual experiences a player encounters as they roam through an area, and there's also game design on a macro level, which is about what areas exist where and why. This is made exponentially more demanding when the game design has to fit a grander narrative. It's similar to the challenge a band faces in assembling a concept album. That Xenoblade is able to do both so dang well, to create a world where every area has its own distinct air and purpose, and to make every interaction in those areas, even the side quests, enjoyable is nothing less than masterful. Anyway, if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more distinctive content. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that atmospheric stuff. Adios, comrades!